Hello, my name is Timur Dadabaev, and I am going to talk today about the decolonizing Central Asian international relations, Central Asia in post-colonial age. In terms of the problem statement, I would like to emphasize three main points. There is a duality of images associated with the role of Central Asia in the world politics, with the region being placed in the center of debate at the regional level, but being ignored at the global one. Secondly, there is little impact of Central Asian regional understanding of international relations on the understanding of the structure of international relations in general, in international setting. And thirdly, regional events are mainly narrated using the theoretical platforms developed in other parts of the world, turning Central Asian region into mere consumer of theoretical knowledge, while regional knowledge in respect to international relations and regional knowledge generation appears to either exist in parallel dimension, be silenced, or simply ignored. In order to address this problem, my talk today is going to raise three main research questions. Firstly, what are the major contemporary theoretical approaches and what are their limitations in narrating Central Asian regional international relations? Secondly, what are the implications of such deficiencies for the discipline of international relations and for interstate relations in Central Asian region? And thirdly, what are the features of Central Asian IR, international relations, currently unaccounted for by mainstream theories? My talk is going to proceed through the following sections. First, I'm going to outline my main 6 arguments that I would like to make in this talk. Secondly, I would like to define the positivist and rationalist schools that I criticize in this talk and present their alternatives in international relations. Thirdly, I will outline the selected images of Central Asia as depicted in many studies of international relations. That would also bring me to the point and importance of engaging Western and to some extent Russian theories of international relations in Central Asian setting. I will then talk about the problems associated with the Western and Russian narratives of international relations in Central Asia by focusing on coloniality, sovereignty, and transitionality of Central Asia. This would also bring me to the discussion of great game narrative, which is very popular in studies of international relations of Central Asia. And I will conclude my talk by pointing to the emerging features of Central Asian international relations. In terms of the arguments, I have 6 main arguments to present today. The first one is that the collapse of the Soviet Union resulted in an interest towards post-Soviet space, including Central Asia. However, area specialists do not necessarily address the relevance of regional developments to the international theoretical frameworks. Secondly, the continued over-reliance on the rational choice theories that we're going to discuss later on led to the general crisis of international relations as a discipline. And that is the failure to account for the frequent changes in the behavior of the states. And as a result, many rationalist assumptions have become the dogmatic final truth that many scholars addressing Central Asia accept as given. The third point that I would like to emphasize is that rationalist frames often impose theoretical constructs without proper empirical grounding. Such an imposition has the potential to lead to the theoretical colonization similar to the Marxist dogmatic narrative of the past that Central Asia has been exposed to. Fourth, the main deficiency of rationalist schools that I am explaining in my talk is the failure to account for the socially constructed nature of the identities, equal agencies, interest, and strategic actors of Central Asian states. Fifth, this talk advocates a narrative that attributes equal agency to Central Asian actors, but not only in their ability to shape their foreign policy behaviors, but also in terms of knowledge generation as exemplified by various conceptual and theoretical contributions to the understanding of international relations. And finally, I argue in this talk that underlying principles of Central Asian post-colonial international relations, among others, include the notion of neighborhood as part of nationhood, construction of self through the neighborhood, the notion of regional sovereignty connected to the notion of brotherhood in Central Asia, and emphasis on the shared values and norms, such as enduring, informal collective decision-making, and institution of political leaders. So to start the discussion, I would like to define what are the positivist or rationalist schools in international relations. We have two, traits, realist one and liberalist one. The realist trait emphasizes states as the main actors of international relations. They're egoists. These actors are rational, calculating. State sovereignty is sacred for them, based on the Westphalian system of 1648. World is about anarchy and competition. Power and interest are defined through material and physical means. Liberalist traits emphasize that states and other non-state institutions are the main actors. States are conglomerates of interests. Interest and power, according to liberalists, can be both rooted in material and moral values. World for liberalists is not only about anarchy and competition. There are these notions of international regimes, organizations, which define international governance for them. And liberal values of democracy and free market are the basis for cooperation. However, these two traits represent two extremes in depicting and narrating international relations in different parts of the world. And that's the reason why certain scholars refer to these schools as, or the scheme where these two traits dominate as tyranny of false polarities. In terms of alternatives, I outlined, several schools of international relations which have been applied to Central Asia or have been relevant in narrative of Central Asia. These are Marxist schools which emphasize struggle of classes, means of production, and historical materialism. English school, which emphasizes the notion of anarchical society, the choice between order-based societies and justice-based ones. For English school, world cannot be perfected, but it can be improved. Post-structuralists, postmodernists focus on the text because for them there is nothing beyond the text, and everything in the world is a textual sort of expression of the world. So they apply double reading and deconstruction to the tools as the tools of analysis, and they regard current developments in the world as the text which needs to be decoded. Post-colonial theory focuses on the Western discourses which construct non-Western states and demonstrate Western insecurities. These discourses define power relations as natural or even inevitable. For post-colonial scholars, hybridity of discourses is a byproduct of colonial influences, local interpretations, and post-colonial adaptations. And finally, constructivists, and this is the school that we emphasize in our educational programs in Tsukuba very much, emphasize the fact that international behavior of the state is the subject matter of social construction. Social construction is the subject of interaction and social environment. And social construction is conditioned by imagination, communication, and constraints of the state. So these are the alternatives which are presented in the sort of current field of international relations and which can be applied to the studies of international relations in Central Asia. So let us look now into how Central Asia is depicted in modern international relations. The regional states in their current shape and form have been first created as republics of the Soviet Union from 1917 to around 1936. So in that sense, they are the product of decolonization because the very creation of these states emphasized or symbolized their decolonization from the Tsarist imperial Russian governance of this territory. But at the same time, their inclusion into the Soviet Union has turned them the parts of what has been called an affirmative action empire by certain scholars, and sort of added the neo-colonizing aspect to their existence under the Marxist ideological pretext. At the same time, the notion of sovereignty for the state is very different from the Western understanding of sovereignty. In their majority, they acquired their sovereignty and claimed their sovereignty within the boundaries of the former Soviet Union around 1989 to 1990, while their independence did not happen up until 1991, the time of the collapse of the Soviet Union. Despite having been endowed with a historical heritage, civilizational richness, transcontinental transportation infrastructure potential, and immense reserves of oil, natural gas, and uranium, this region has remained marginal for IR scholars. In terms of images, we need to sort of differentiate between the different time frames. In the initial, at the initial sort of period of their independence, the images of Central Asian states were largely, associated with the notions of them being catapulted into the independence, them being given the independence, them struggling with the, building their nationhoods, unfulfilled promises that they could not live up to, the potential for them to become new Afghanistans or turning them sort of into the states which are going to be different from Afghanistan. The notion of failing state has always been one of the, the keyword applied in various time frames in respect to Central Asia. A discourse of competition for natural resources and domination, in other words, grand game narrative, has been very sort of popular discourse, often applied to Central Asia. And discussions on Central Asia are, often hijacked by discussions on how to contain Russia, China, Islam, terrorism. And so, these discussions have been very popular, from 1990s to around 2000. In the later years, we see, the Central Asia being associated with the fragile region, forgotten region, the region which has some kind of curse because of the failure to produce the Western liberal democracy. With the strengthening role of China, we see the images of Chinese hegemony, Russian opposition to it, or Central Asian ASEAN movement. At the same time, we also see the the emergence of the critical attitude to this kind of images. And I've mentioned several scholars like Nick Megaran, John Hoddershaw, and who actually attempt to suggest that there is much more to Central Asia than the images produced, which are mentioned above. But this kind of emerging critical voices are still marginal, and we still have the dominant frames of discussions which tend to depict Central Asian states as following the frames which are dominant in rationalist schools. In Russian geopolitical constructs, we also see some interesting features which emphasize the Eurasian destiny of Central Asia, and these are associated with the studies of Dugin and others. We also see the features of defensive realism against the Western encroachments on Russian and Central Asian sovereignty, which are largely, associated with the Putinism and the era of the, President Putin. But, in real sense, this is a Russian mimicry of the Western approaches to Eastern Europe, and they are projected by a Russian policy on, the Russian near abroad. As discourses, these are, important sort of sources of our inquiries, but, it's also important to emphasize that, to a great extent, this kind of Russian discourses then turn into the Russian foreign policy constructs, which paternalize Central Asia, denying Central Asian agency. And here, I've, just citing the recent phrase of Foreign Minister Lavrov, when he was confronted by reporters in respect to, the opposition voiced in Kyrgyzstan in respect to Eurasian Economic Community. His answer was that if there are opinions in Kyrgyzstan regarding the need for change in Eurasian Economic Community, I do not discard that this reflection, this is a reflection of competitive processes and competition for Central Asia, which our Western colleagues are actively entering. We, Russians, believe that such competition is counterproductive, and it is much better that we cooperate in order to help Central Asian countries. Again, through this phrase, you can see that Russia sees any processes taking place in this part of the world as a part of competition by the West and opposition to the Russian interest in this part of the world. Russia denies the voices of Central Asian agencies, and at the same time, Russia calls upon helping Central Asian countries because they are not capable of helping themselves. So this is a very sort of typical attitude that we see in many of Russian geopolitical constructs, which to a certain degree are colonial or neo-colonial. At the same time, we see in recent years, the increasing number of studies which challenge this kind of neo-colonial sort of perceptions, both in Western and Russian geopolitical constructs. And I've mentioned few studies, and I would like to commend these studies and these authors for the courage to take on the dominant narratives of international relations, in which they are attempting to place Central Asia in IR theory, introduce new or at least currently forgotten sort of narratives into Central Asian international relations. They also try to narrate Central Asia from alternative schools like English school by introducing the notions of anarchical society on domestic politics. There are studies connecting foreign policy behavior to identity. The good example would be Sabina Isebaeva's recent works. Problematization of Russian and Chinese images of John Hazershaw and his colleagues. On conceptualization of power and how power is conceptualized differently in Central Asia when compared to other parts of the world. Identities and institutions in Central Asia. Also, our recent graduates from Tsukuba who are now developing their doctorate degrees, doctorate thesis into the book projects focused on the notions of non-Western feminism or the new Central Asian donor actors in Central Asia. And their books hopefully are going to come next year. So in that sense, these new trends need to be continued. And my current inquiry and my current study is to some extent is an attempt to contribute to this study. At the same time, some of these studies have, seem to have this critical angle, but they still use the Western development as the measurement tool to evaluate the processes in Central Asia. And so that is sort of problematic aspect of that. In particular, I would like to single out the notions of sovereignty, coloniality, and transitionality of Central Asian states. So in terms of the sovereignty, Sovereignty in the Western connotation attributed autonomy and equality between European powers to each other. Given the long history of pre-Soviet and Soviet coexistence in Central Asia, sovereignty has a different connotation in Central Asian context. One that instead of autonomy and independence from each other, relates to the responsibility for and facilitation tool of foreign policy and domestic policy for these countries, as opposed to the Western notions, which are often rationalist and which often refer to the sovereignty as autonomy and complete independence from each other. That is the reason why in Central Asian context, these states differentiated between their sovereignty and independence, and many, if not all, obtained their sovereignty much earlier than their independence. The Western notion of sovereignty as a legitimized and delegated right to govern within unlimited powers within one's territory has only served to defend one's personal power in Central Asia. And in that sense, the sovereignty in Central Asia has become a negative term or negative sovereignty, with the latest example being Turkmenistan. In the similar manner, we need to approach the notion of coloniality. It's a very sort of complicated notion in Central Asia. On the one hand, we recognize that the Soviet past of these states, during which Marxist and Leninist ideas, upon being imported into these societies by Bolsheviks, became a matter of faith, belief, and essentially a Marxist religion, replacing local religious and beliefs systems. However, in the post-Soviet setting, Marxist-Leninist interpretations were replaced by the Western interpretations. This time around, the inherited knowledge and IR traditions are based on the Western ideas of progress and ethical superiority. The nationhood of these states is often depicted as undesired and given or received. Their participation in post-Soviet structures, such as Commonwealth of Independent States, is depicted as a form of civilized divorce. And joining the Shanghai Cooperation Organization or Belt and Road Initiative is depicted as a move to bandwagon the dragon, China. The difference between us and them is constantly emphasized and reproduced in international Asian studies, and the Central Asian us is always inferior to the knowledgeable Russian or Western master narratives. And actually, this point is very important because, very often when we read even local writings on international relations, we see that, that knowledge which is imported from abroad, especially the one which is published in the West, is always considered to be superior to the one generated in the local setting. Transitionality of Central Asia has the same kind of colonial feature, and that is the structure of transitionality of Central Asia sustains itself by continuously referring to Central Asian states as transitional, new, emerging, and newly independent. According to this logic, for such states to stop being transitional and to become normal, they need authoritative wisdom and recognition of conventional Western ideas. In this sense, for these post-Soviet constituencies, the collapse of the Soviet Union did not bring about the end of colonization, but rather a change from a Russian master to a Western one. These societies have been continuously placed in a system of duality characterized by modern versus traditional, agricultural versus industrial, democratic versus authoritarian. Their non-European, non-Russian, and non-Western traditions and approaches are considered to belong to the past, while their future lies in global, universal values and norms. And another sort of feature that I would like to emphasize is this notion of the great game. It seems to never die, really. There are several factors responsible for the stable images of Central Asia through the narrative of great game and competition in international relations. Great game narrative, which emphasizes that Central Asia is being rivaled for and competed for by the major powers like Russia, China, and the United States. In international relations, reproduced in various formats, either from above or from the local rules. Based on Russian and alternative narratives that this region is being hunted for. It needs to be emphasized that local political leadership is also interested in this kind of ignited rhetoric of great game, because in an effort to gain economic assistance, because if you can present this region as the one which is the subject of competition, then it's easier to monetize your support in respect to particular power in search for economic assistance. However, at the same time, there is an increasing understanding that great game narrative and rivalry image for the region is no longer empirically valid. And I give you here one example of Filippo Costa Brunelli's work, but actually we see an increasing number of studies which emphasize that great game narrative, although is very handy in terms and very appealing in terms of the image, is no longer proven to exist in Central Asia. Recent Russian and Chinese activities in Central Asia have more to do not with the great game intentions, but rather with the desire, for problem solving, functional nature of cooperation, and secondly, the anti-Russian and anti-Chinese rhetoric in the West, which pushes Russia and China for proactive engagements in other regions. And so in that sense, the great game narrative is not really, effective way to narrate, the Central Asian international relations anymore. So what is then, post-colonial Central Asia? And what are the features which appear to shape in Central Asian international relations? The first thing that I would like to emphasize is that Soviet past does not define Central Asia anymore, population-wise, language-wise, ideology-wise, or development-wise. Post-colonial hybridity is still there, but it's not the main feature of Central Asian international relations anymore. On the other hand, we see the emerging features, such as neighborhood as a part of nationhood. Normally, neighborhood and regional formation is always opposed to the nation sort of building strategy, because in the nationhood is always associated with the sovereignty and autonomy of the state. But in Central Asian case, in neighborhood is always features as a part of the nationhood construction. Policy of neighborhood first was always one of the principles that Central Asian countries adhered to, even at the times when these countries did not have good sort of regional relations. In early 90s, we still saw the discourse of importance of neighborhood. Despite the fact that countries like Uzbekistan, Tajikistan had their frictions and did not actually have a productive relationship. Nevertheless, the leaders of this country always emphasize that neighbors are important, and this is a part of the Central Asian identity and part of the identity at the local level, because at the local level we always hear the phrases like Yon Khoshnin, John Khoshnin. Your neighbor is the dearest partner, or Khoshnin tinch bolsa ozin tinch. If your neighbor is at peace, you are going to be at peace. So there is this understanding that neighborhood is not counterposed to the nationhood, and we increasingly see this importance and emphasis on the neighborhood in recent years, with the change of leadership in Uzbekistan and Kazakhstan, with the changes in recent leadership in Kyrgyzstan. We see that these countries consolidate their powers, and they consolidate their limited resources in order to help each other. Importantly, another feature that we see is that the notion of regional sovereignty through the notion of brotherhood. And this is very important because for Central Asian countries, despite their differences, they always appeal to this notion of them being brothers to each other. And in recent years, I would like to emphasize that even Afghanistan is increasingly being referred to as a brotherly nation. In the past, Afghanistan has always been positioned as Central Asians' other, something very different, something that they don't want to be associated with. But in recent years, with the increase in the rhetoric of regional sovereignty sharing and brotherhood, we hear that Central Asian governments and leaders refer to Afghanistan as their, as the country within their brotherhood connection. And the reasons why we see an increasing sort of importance and emphasis on the neighborhood and brotherhood through the regional sovereignty sharing is because we see the shared norms and values which are being shaped through the notions of enduring, sabr, collective decision making, informal one, maslahat, and political elders. In recent years, in particular, we see that these countries tend to, intensify their decision-making coordination, not only at the official level. We've in recent years we've seen that the presidents of these countries and former presidents, like President Nazarbayev, who does not actually have the agency anymore as the head of the state, they meet for informal gatherings at the bordering areas in Central Asia. They do not issue any statements or documents. These meetings are more of a sort of advisory nature for them, and this is very much in line with the spirit of maslahat, meaning that in Central Asia, when certain events at the local and public level are conducted, you need to have informal discussion before you actually announce your intentions. And so in that particular sense, we see that this informal collective decision making is increasing in its importance in the region in recent years. And then finally, we also see this institution of political elders. This is very important because with the death of Islam Karimov, who was also considered to be the political elder in this part of the world, we see that that these countries increasingly appreciate the knowledge and the wisdom which rests with the elder generation of politicians. And that's the reason why, despite the fact that President Nazarbayev resigned from his office, he remains a very influential figure to whom these countries and leaders often appeal for advice or for consultation. And in recent years, we see that even during the summits of these states, that Uzbek president always refers to his Kazakh former president Nazarbayev with the very respectful sort of manner, and refers to the the wisdom that Nazarbayev possesses for the future coordination between the states. And I think this is very important sort of feature or institution of political elders, which has the potential to develop as one of the features of the the emerging international relations in Central Asia. And finally, my concluding points would be the following. Firstly, this talk and inquiry does not need to be understood as a negation of the Western and Russian advances in international relations. Rather, I am calling upon the realization or understanding of the importance of construction of Central Asian international relations and the features of Central Asian international relations, which are different from those in other parts of the world. Secondly, while I indicated 3 emerging features of Central Asian international relations, there is a need to further complement this by pointing out to the elements which are which differentiate Central Asia international relations from other parts of the world. And I'm confident that we still need to complement the elements that I mentioned by additional features, which need to be appreciated and emphasized as Central Asian contributions to the structure of international relations. And thirdly, when we come to the point that we sort of account for the features of Central Asian international relations, they will then need to be integrated into the theoretical body of knowledge, which need to be considered as the next step of inquiry. Thank you very much for your attention. I will stop here.